Good afternoon, everyone. Through the power of partnerships, which is a big part of the way Rotary works, we found our next speaker. We were looking for partnering with local organizations, so we came across the Autopoietic Ideas group here, and they had identified Scarlett as an interesting woman who has a message that will change the world. So we just began exploring the possibility of bringing her here. On December 14th, 2012, Scarlett Lewis experienced something that no parent should ever have to. She lost her son, Jesse, to an act of unimaginable violence at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Scarlett's life changed forever. She's here to share her story, a story not about the massacre. It's a story of love and survival, how to find courage when you think you have none, and how to choose love instead of anger, fear, and hatred. Scarlett Lewis, founder of the Jesse Lewis Choose Love Foundation, is here today to inspire us as Rotarians committed to peace building in the world. Despite the horrific things that happen around us, we can be committed to peace. And her message of healing love is powerful. Rotarian colleagues, please welcome this woman of courage and compassion, Scarlett Lewis.
Hello. I have been here for the last day and have been incredibly inspired listening to all that you do around the world. And it's really incredible. Thank you. Thank you all for enabling other people to choose love and for all that you do. It's really incredible. I know that the Rotary in Newtown, Connecticut, so this is a local Rotary, has been incredibly instrumental in the healing of Newtown. You know, you think that this tragedy happened 2.5 years ago, and we always want to put a timeline on healing. However, there is no timeline. And still, Newtown is very traumatized, and not just the victims' parents and people who were directly impacted in the school, but also the entire community. And I've learned a lot from the tragedy because unfortunately through suffering comes great growth. But one thing that I learned about trauma is that it layers like an onion. So if you experience a trauma in your life and you don't deal with it as such, maybe you thought that it was someone else's trauma and not your own, it starts to layer like an onion. So then you experience another trauma and it just layers and layers, and your brain tries to balance itself and covers it up so that you can still function. So then when something like Sandy Hook happens in a community, even though you may not have lost a child, even though you may not have known anyone personally, all of your personal traumas can come unglued like this, and your onion opens. And you have to deal with all the traumas now in your life. You may be going back to childhood. This is something that was just a lesson that we've been learning. And so this is what's still going on in Newtown. And the local Rotary Club there has really stepped up to the plate from day one, helping us with funeral expenses and every other kind of expense imaginable, and now covering a lot of the town's mental health expenses. And these are continuing even to today, 2.5 years later, and we're a town of 30,000 people. Not everyone's getting mental health help, but a lot of people are. It's really surprising. So that's where Newtown is. Today, let's see if I do this right, I'm going to tell you a story about a little boy who left a message powerful enough to change the world. I'm going to tell you about things that I've learned through this tragedy. Do I think that this is a picture of Jesse and I? Do I think that I absolutely did. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. You know, it's amazing. lose someone, you lose a child, which is tremendously painful, and it's hard to accept the fact that you will not touch them again, have them physically near you again on the earth. But I have accepted this new relationship that I have with Jesse, and I do know that he's with me, he's helping me all the time. I talk with him all the time. He helps me with the foundation. I feel like this is just an extension of what he wanted me to do. And I get signs all the time. And thank goodness they're all documented. And I usually have one or more people with me, because if I didn't, people would think that I was crazy and no one would believe them. But for instance, this is just a small example of what happens all the time. JT, who is Jesse's older brother, he's 14 now, he was 12 at the time of the tragedy. He and I were invited to Australia in December by Dr. Bruce Lipton. Dr. Bruce Lipton is the founder of a field of study called epigenetics. And epigenetics says that your health, physically, mentally, and emotionally, is impacted by your environment, more so than your genes. And he likes my message because I say that our thoughts affect us on a cellular level. And so anyway, JT and I are in Australia. We're there for 2 weeks. We had one free day. And so I thought that we'd go visit this friend that we knew in a neighboring town. So we set off, and I'm very flexible. We get utterly and completely lost. So for a while I'm saying, this is great, JT, this is just fun, this is our one day, we're together, it's wonderful, this is beautiful countryside, we've never been to Australia, who cares if we're lost, and who cares if we ever find our way to this guy's house? And of course that deteriorated. 2 hours later, I'm like, this is ridiculous. We're going to turn around. This is just, I can't, I've had it up to here. Call the guy, tell him we can't find our way, we're not going to see him, and we're turning around. So he gets out the phone, calls our friend, and says, we're utterly lost. The friend says, you know what, you're right around the corner from my house. Turn around, go down to the, pull off to the side, and wait. So I'm driving the car, I go, you know, and drive back down. I pull over onto the side of the road and get out because I'm really annoyed for no reason, I'm embarrassed to say, and turn around, and there's this sign right in front of me. You see the car there, I turn around and there's a sign, J. Lewis, with 2 roses, and of course my favorite thing in the whole world is roses, so that was a really, really powerful sign for me for Jesse saying, Mom, chill out. So the tragedy was not just a Sandy Hook tragedy, and what I'm finding is that, what I found out really soon after, it wasn't just a Connecticut tragedy, it wasn't a United States tragedy, it was a worldwide tragedy. It impacted the entire world. It's amazing when I've traveled to many different countries, and people will say to me, I remember exactly where I was when I got the news. I just had a meeting with the president of Autism Speaks, and he said, I remember exactly where I was when I got the news. I was 40,000 feet up in a plane. I was so annoyed. I couldn't get cell service. And then they go on and they tell me I couldn't get cell service. So I went and I knocked on the pilot's door. I told him to flip the switch. They did. And all of a sudden I got all this news feed of everything that was going on. And I wish that I hadn't done that. So, you know, I don't remember ever hearing anybody react to a tragedy since Kennedy was shot, and I hear my parents say, well, I know exactly where I was. So it did affect the whole world, and it got a lot of attention. President Obama came to Newtown 3 days after the tragedy and met with each of the families individually. I've gotten to meet a lot of really cool people. I call these gifts from Jesse, JT and I. This is the Dalai Lama. And I have to go to that day briefly. I'm not going to talk a lot about the tragedy because everybody knows what happened. But I am going to go to that day just to explain just what Jesse's experience very quickly, because I think that there's an important lesson in that. So on that day, an angry young man took a semi-automatic weapon and several other weapons, got up that morning, killed his mom in her sleep in her bed, and then came to Sandy Hook Elementary. It was a planned attack. He had planned this for about a year and a half. He shot his way through the glass doors and started his killing spree. He killed a couple of the teachers and principal before he turned into Jesse's first grade classroom. And he entered 2 first grade classrooms. Jesse's was the first. And he continued his killing spree, and he murdered Jesse's teacher, who was standing as close as you possibly can to another human being, and his gun ran out of bullets. And so during the short delay that it took for him to change his clip, Jesse, instead of running, yelled to his friends who were standing on the other side of the room to run now. And they said that it's because he said that they ran, and he was instrumental in saving 9 of his friends' lives before the gunman reloaded and killed the remaining kids in the room. And then, of course, he went to the next room, and all in all, he ended up murdering 20 first graders in their 2 classrooms and 6 teachers and administrators. And I tell that story in that level of detail because I use that courage that Jesse showed that day as perspective in my own life, because it's not the courage that we see in the media. It's not what we normally think of as courage. It's that courage that we all have within us to be kind and to be gentle and to be caring and loving and serving as you all do. It's that kind of courage. So when I wake up in the morning and I think, ugh, this is pretty difficult and I don't really want to be doing this, I wish it were different, I remember Jesse's courage and I think, well, he really did the hard part, and now I'm doing the easy part of our purpose. So that morning, of course, started out like any other morning. And I'm a single mom. I have 2 boys, Jesse, who is 6, and JT, who is 12. So I'm getting them ready for school. And I walked Jesse out to meet his dad, who was picking him up to take him to school. And of course, we're late as usual, and I'm rush. And I turned around to give Jesse a hug, and I noticed that he had written with his little fingernail in the frost on the side of my car, "I love you." And he drew little hearts on my windows. And I, thank goodness, was present enough and realizing that that was one of those moments in life that I said, wait, right there, don't move. I'm gonna run inside and get my camera. And I came back out, positioned him by the car, took a picture, actually deleted one because it was overexposed. I took another one and then sent him on his way. So that is his last picture. And I am so thankful that I actually got a picture of my goodbye message, another picture to document. The next morning, I left the firehouse that day. So the school's situated at the end of a quarter-mile cul-de-sac, and there's a fire department that's right on the end, and that's where all the parents met. That's where all the children were evacuated to, and so it was very chaotic that whole day. You guys all knew what happened before we did, hours before we did. We weren't told anything. And finally, by the time we were told, which was kind of a blessing. There were a lot of people that were angry about it, but for me, I kind of was able to come to a realization on my own throughout the day that Jesse wasn't coming back. Just little things that people would ask for, his picture, identification, markings. I mean, it all started to make sense. And by the end of the day, I already realized pretty much what had happened. But I didn't, we were all supposed to stay in this one room, and they wanted to keep us in this one room. The only time I went into the room at the firehouse was to write Jesse's name down on a list of those that were missing. And I remember writing his name, and it was so far down the list. I mean, it never occurred to me even then that anything could have happened to him. I mean, nothing can ever happen to your child. Even when I got the news when I was at work, which was an hour away, there was a school shooting in a school in Sandy Hook, I really wasn't that concerned. and even writing my name down. It's like, there's no possible way that something really bad could have happened to this many people. And of course, in the end, so then I never went back into that room because it was chaos and people were demanding information. And so I just wanted peace for my family and I. We stayed outside. We were the only family that stayed outside. They kept us right inside of where the media could see us. And by the time we found out, my brother and his wife had driven down from Boston. My other two brothers were by my side. JT had texted me from middle school and said, "Can I come and wait with you?" And I thought, yeah, sure, of course, because when they find Jesse, he's gonna be scared. He'll probably want to see his older brother. We'll probably go out to dinner. So JT, unfortunately, was sitting there the whole time. And I remember right before we actually heard the news, we were together and kind of just surrounding each other. JT and I were sitting down in chairs with our knees facing each other. And at one point he said, "It's not gonna be okay. It's just not going to be okay," and he started to break down. And I kind of had an out-of-body experience, and I made my mind up right then, and I looked in on both of us speaking, and I heard myself speaking, and this person that's third person was saying, "What are you talking about? Who are you? This is how you have no idea." But my body was saying to JT, "Everything's going to be fine. We are going to be fine. If Jesse has died, we know exactly where he is. And he's in paradise. We are going to have the harder time." And that was something that I made my mind up right then about. And of course, we found out very shortly later that he had died. So I wanted to just tell you briefly about Jesse and who Jesse was. So Jesse was loud and always smiling. And always happy. He was a bundle of energy, almost bouncing off the walls. We have a little farm where we have lots of aminals, and so they will forever be aminals. So when you hear me saying that, you can quote me on that. We have horses and dogs and chickens. And here's Jesse on his 6th birthday having so much fun on one of our horses. Jesse was born 11 pounds. So he kind of kept that larger than life persona his entire life. And I remember walking down to the nursery, and the first time I saw him, all the nurses were gathered around this window and they were taking pictures of something. And I walked up and I said, "What are you taking pictures of?" And they said, "There is this enormous baby and he's trying to crawl out of his bassinet." And I looked in, and when you have an 11-pound baby and then you have next to him, flanking him, 2 6 or even 8-pound babies, they look tiny. And so he actually had crawled to the end, and he was trying to crawl out of his crib. So that gives you a little idea about his energy level throughout his whole life. Jesse's favorite toys were little yellow ducks. He had a little Spider-Man lunchbox, and so he would put stuff in it every time, and it was usually half army men and half little yellow rubber ducks. And I call that the dichotomy of his personality, because he was just this little tiny cute 6-year-old that loved yellow ducks, but he also loved army men. And my friend gave him this army helmet, and he would literally come home every day, kick off his boots. He would strap on this army helmet, which he wore to bed. He never took off. I wouldn't allow him to wear it to school, but he wore it everywhere else. And he would go out and do what we call patrolling around the property lines, pretending like he was keeping us safe. So he did really have this very stoic and protective nature as well. And we actually buried him with the army helmet. I kind of wish we didn't, but at the time it seemed like a good idea. And I thought, of course, like everybody else was thinking, I asked myself the same question: how could something like this happen? How could something like this happen? And in my mind, it was an angry thought that caused the entire tragedy. So Adam Lanza, people say, well, he was mentally ill. Well, his diagnosis was Asperger's and maybe anorexia, but in my mind, he was born a perfect child of God. right? He wasn't born a mass murderer. And so how did he go from that to being a mass murderer? And in my mind, I pictured him as a little boy and having an angry thought and not having the tools and nurturing environment to deal with that thought. And we know that an angry thought can impact us on a cellular level. It actually changes us physically. It changes the wiring in our brain. So then he continued to have angry thoughts, left unchecked, left uncomforted, and there is a cycle. Continuous angry thoughts just make highways in our brain. So all of a sudden, then all we feel is anger. And repetitive anger leads to rage. And I feel like rage is what fills our prison systems and leads to acts of violence, such as Sandy Hook. And the amazing thing about that theory is that a thought can be changed. And looking back over his life, you saw anger and issues and perhaps bullying starting very early. Throughout his entire life, huge red flags. For instance, when he was in, this is just one of them, when he was in 5th grade, he wrote a story called, oh my God, I can't even remember, but it was about a witch that came to Sandy Hook Elementary. He was going to that school at this time, and this witch came to Sandy Hook Elementary with a broomstick. The broomstick opened into a semi-automatic weapon and murdered children. And that went really unnoticed, and no one did anything about that. So when I say red flags, I'm serious about it. So his anger was multiplying, you see that, and it started early. And but the amazing thing is the thought can be changed. So at Jesse's funeral, I got up and I spoke, and I said, everybody's asking what they can do for us, and I appreciate that. And there is something that you can do. I would like everyone here today to start thinking about what you think about. And I think when you do that, you're going to realize that you have more angry thoughts, more frustrated thoughts than you realize. And so I asked everyone there to please consciously change one angry thought into a loving thought. And just one a day. And I said, by doing that, you'll make yourself feel better, you'll positively impact those around you, and through the ripple effect, you'll make this a kinder, more loving world. And the feedback that I got from that was really incredible. My father's friend wrote him an email that he forwarded to me, and he said, he was a doctor in the Midwest, and he said, David, I didn't realize I've been angry my entire life. And I started thinking about it, and I dedicated my life to choosing love, and my practice is dedicated to choosing love. Our patients, our staff were hanging signs, and I got similar feedback, and it was really, really incredible, and I knew that I was onto something. So I got a new definition of compassion that day. I call December 14th, 2012 the world's greatest day of compassion, at least for us in Sandy Hook, because on that day, everyone came together in the true meaning of compassion. And I think in society, we think of compassion a lot as empathy. And that's only one small component when you feel someone else's pain. And when you do that, it's painful. So we hear of things now like empathy burnout, because it's painful to feel somebody else's pain. And sometimes we turn away from compassion. And I can think of times when I did myself. I remember at 7 o'clock at night going through the checkout line. I remember seeing an article in People magazine about Columbine. And I remember the thought process. I'm walking through, and I'm like, oh my God, poor people, ugh. So painful, I'm so tired, and I have 2 kids, I'm a single mom, and I just want to be happy. I really just can't go there. and I went on with my life. And what I was missing out on was the second part of compassion, which is what we were shown, which is what I learned from the entire world, is that the second part of compassion is actively doing something to help ease that pain. And that's the most powerful part of compassion. As you guys already know, so I'm speaking to the choir, but it's in doing something for someone else that you receive back all of the energy and love that you get out, and it's healing for yourself. So when I went back home for the first time, because I actually didn't go home initially from the firehouse. In fact, I thought I will never be able to go home to my little farmhouse that I raised my 2 boys with Jesse's energy bouncing all over the place. I couldn't imagine walking back in, so I thought I would never go. But I did have to go to pick out his clothes for the funeral. So I went in, surrounded by family and friends, and it was on my way out that I found a message that Jesse had written on our kitchen chalkboard. And this was sometime shortly before he died. And he wrote 3 words: nurturing, healing, love. Now, those 3 words are not in the vernacular of a 6-year-old. And they're phonetically spelled because, of course, Jesse was just in 1st grade and learning to write. But those 3 words are in the definition of compassion across all cultures. And I knew instantly when I saw that message that he had a spiritual knowing that he wasn't going to be on earth for very much longer, and that he wanted to leave a message of comfort for his family and friends. But I knew that it was more than that. I knew that it was also a message of inspiration for the world, and it was where we had to move to in order to survive. And we took that message, and a lot of people analyzed it, and we broke it apart, and we defined each of the words. So nurturing means loving kindness and gratitude. Healing means forgiveness, and love is compassion in action. And practicing those 3 values, really in that order, is the algorithm for choosing love. It's the formula for choosing love. And so that's how we founded the Jesse Lewis Choose Love Foundation. On that same day that I found that message, JT had come home, and he was in his room getting his chargers for his phone and game, very important, right? So on the way out, now we had all been getting these incredible signs from Jesse. Like the first morning that I woke up, I spent the night at my mom's house. JT was next to me, and I woke up the next morning, the most horrible feeling in the world when you realize what happened. And I took my laptop, opened it up on my lap, flipped on the light, and I was going to start writing his obituary. And the light blinked like this 3 steady times. And I just had the peace that passes all understanding flow over me. And I felt this amazing warmth and comfort. And I knew that it was Jesse telling me that he was okay. In fact, I said, "Oh, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that you're here and that you're okay." So we had incredible, incredible signs like that. Like people would be waking up, and we'd share these experiences at 3 a.m. and all the visions and visitations that everyone had. And I never really thought about JT in all this. He's kind of on the periphery. He's listening in. So on this day, as I'm walking out, JT comes up and he says, "Mom, you know how everybody's been getting signs from Jesse?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I got a sign." And I said, "Oh my God, you did? What was it?" And he pulled out this little piece of paper and he unfolded it and he said, "I found this message on my desk. And the message says, 'Have a lot of fun.'" So this was an incredible message for Jesse to leave JT. Because whereas Jesse's bouncing off the walls, laughing, I feel like sometimes I spent half of his life telling him to be quiet, playing the quiet game. JT is not the exact opposite, but he takes a little bit of cajoling. You know, he's much more serious. And I have to grab him and shake him and tickle him sometimes to get him to even smile. And so this message for JT, when I saw it, it was prophetic. It was amazing. It was a beautiful, loving message for a little brother to leave for his big brother. But also, I thought this is something else that can be shared with the world. Because, while we're practicing nurturing, healing love, aren't we all just here to have a lot of fun too? I think that we can't lose sight of that. So I try to have this as my mantra. When I'm going into scary meetings or something, I have a little bird that whispers in my ear and says, "You're supposed to be having a lot of fun." And I go, "Oh yeah, right." So this really helps me, and this is part of our message. I have to share this with you because this is so incredible. There's a field of study called precognitive drawing, and this was founded by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote about the 5 stages of grief. And I've met several authors who've lost children in my journey, and one of the authors that I met, Carol Kern, had actually lived with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and studied with her for years after her 6-year-old daughter was washed away by a rogue wave. And I brought a couple of Jesse's drawings to Carol in a meeting. This drawing came back in his personal belongings a week after he died. They took things out of his desk, put them in a box chronologically, and brought them to us. And we call this drawing the angel and the bad man. So this is exactly how Jesse died. He was the only one facing the shooter. And the amazing thing is, it's called precognitive drawing. When Carol saw it, she said, "Oh my God, this is, I studied this with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. This is the most powerful example of precognitive drawing I've ever seen." And what's even more incredible, so it took, I never see things myself, I have to have them pointed out. So if you look in the shooter's head, we call him the shooter, which is the guy with the block head. And by the way, Jesse'd never drawn anything like this. Like he did draw cops and robbers and things like that, but this was drawn 2 days before he died. In the back of the bad man's head, you can actually see something that looks like a demon. And I don't think that he meant to draw this. I wish I had a laser pointer, but it's, you can see the black cloak, 2 black blunted wings. At the very top underneath the curtain, there's a little white thing, that's a face. He has a ball cap on, and he's holding a gun. And there's a phallic symbol that screws down into the head. And then even more amazing is in front of that, and I can point it out. I'll pull this slide back up if anybody's interested because it's really cool. In front of that is an angelic figure. There's and this can't have been drawn. It's almost like a rubbing. And there's a face, there's a halo, and gowns. This person, this angel, Mother Mary, whatever you want to call it, is standing in front of the demon like this. If you can kind of see it, it's very, very vague and not in pencil. But to me, that means that we all have these elements within us. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Native American story of the 2 wolves, but they talk about having 2 wolves within you, and it's whichever wolf, good or bad, you choose to feed. And for me, this is a different depiction of that. So we all have the propensity for good and bad within us. It's whichever choice, it's just a conscious choice we make on a day-to-day basis. And that's the part of us that will grow. But even if we make these horrific bad choices, there's always goodness within us, and always a divine presence, which is what I think this depicts. Then I've given talks all over, and people have come up and they've said, "Oh my God, do you see that the angel is in the shape of a 14?" And I say, "Oh, no, I didn't notice that. What's the significance?" December 14th? And I say, "Oh yeah." And then somebody said, "Oh, and the angel's in the shape of a bullet." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "And that's what took Jesse to heaven." And I said, "Well, that's true." And then one of my neighbors even pointed out that Jesse has a little smile. She said, "It's little, but it's still there." And I said, that's nice. Gives me a little bit of comfort for sure. Still not sure what that thing is at his feet. Maybe you guys can help me figure that out. So Jesse loved to paint. I paint with oils, and he paints with acrylics for obvious reasons, painted with acrylics. And so loved to paint, and this was his last painting. that he did about a month before he died. And I showed this to Carol as well, and she said, "Oh my God, it's a 3-dimensional door." So the outside is a bloody and violent death, and then there's a layer of blue, which is the journey, and then green is the door. It's the color of love, the color of the heart chakra, and that's where he's going. So I'm showing you these because they give me a lot of comfort that there was a spiritual awareness, and I'm hoping that they give you comfort as well. This is a message that Jesse left, not a message really, but just something that he did that I found later, and I want you to take a look at the J in Jesse, because that's going to be significant in my next little story. So the shooting happened on December 14th, and so Christmas was 2 weeks later, and you can imagine that was a very difficult day. For the first time in my life, I'd already done all of my Christmas shopping online, so all of Jesse's presents went to his little nephews. Each one of my brothers, of course, has 2 little boys, and they're younger than mine, so that day they were all running around, and it was incredibly difficult. So I made a decision that day, JT and I have to get out of Newtown. We have to go somewhere, we have to reunite as the family of 2 that we are now. So within 24 hours, we were on our way to Disney World, because I'd been there before with the boys, and it was a relatively short flight, and I felt like it was safe, and I wanted JT to have a good time. So that morning there was a huge snowstorm, like a deluge, and we were going to fly out of White Plains, and this has never happened before, but this pop-up came up, and it said, your point of origin has been changed. You're not flying out of White Plains anymore. You have to fly out of LaGuardia. So we literally turned and then drove down to LaGuardia, and our flight was canceled 3 times. And I'm telling you this for a reason. So then we get on the plane, and they offer a free movie, and we're watching the movie. Everyone is except for me. My movie won't work. It's going on and off, blinking on and off, and then it blinks down 20 channels to something like Payphone, Maroon 5, which was Jesse's favorite song. You listen to the words to that, and I'm writing down every word on my cell phone. I'm looking at JT. He's not into this kind of stuff. I don't want to make him sad. I want to just, I want him to have a good time, so I'm not saying anything. I try to get back up to the movie, and all of a sudden, it blinks down 20 channels and it's Jesse's Girl. So I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing, but I don't want to say anything to JT. So finally he looks over at me and he sees all the difficulty and he says, "Is that Jesse?" And I said, "I think it is." So we land, and one of my friends, nobody knew where we were going. I wasn't talking to anybody. I was staying at my mom's house, so even the media didn't know where I was, which was really nice. So we land, one of my friends that I'm close with texts me and says, "How's the flight?" And I said, "It was incredible. Jesse was all over this flight." And she said, "Sometimes spirits linger because they want to make sure that you're okay." So I knew what I had to do. We got off the plane, and I didn't say anything to JT, but I said, "Can you watch our luggage? I'm going to go to the restroom, and then we'll start our fun journey, our healing adventure." So I went to the restroom, I closed myself in a stall, and I said a prayer. And I said, "Jesse, if you're lingering to make sure that we're going to be okay, we're going to be fine. I want you to go because it's my belief that he would go to be with Jesus." So I said, "I want you to go be in the arms of Jesus. If you could be in both places at once, that would be great. But if you can't, please go and be in the arms of Jesus. We will meet you." It was the hardest thing I ever had to do because I really thought that I was sending his spirit away. And so then I washed my face off. I went out and I said, "All right, JT, let's go rent our car." So we rent our car, we drive out of the driveway of the Orlando airport, we make a right on the highway, and there written in the sky is Jesse and Jesus together forever. And we have a picture of it, the J backwards, Jesse, it is blurry, but it's there, and Jesus together forever. I pulled over, I looked at JT, he looked at me, and he said, "Jesse's with Jesus." And I said, "I know, this is amazing." And so I started taking pictures, and the plane's still up there. And remember, I told you the flight was times, nobody knew we were going, and so nobody really could have known that when we were going to land. So the plane's still flying up there, and it flies over in front of our windshield, and it starts writing another message. And I looked at JT and I said, this is for us. We need to stay and watch it. He said, I know. So while we're sitting there, it writes, you plus God dash smiley face. And I can't get a picture of it because it wiped away everything that every time it wrote a word, a letter, it would blow away. But I said, JT, this is our message that we need to stay close to God to be happy. And he said, I know. Can we go to Disney World now? So that was we got home from our healing adventure. We did go back to the farmhouse, and as you can imagine, it was very difficult. Despite all the signs and everything, we were having a hard time. The school really didn't help us. I called them and I said, I don't know what to do. He refuses to go to school. I don't really think I can't force him to go, because I sent one kid and he never came home, so I'm unable to tell him to go to school, and he doesn't want to go. And they said, well, what do you think's going on here? We're traumatized. What do you want us to do? So we really were home and with very little help. JT had punched a hole in his wall because he was angry, and that's totally understandable. And amazingly, within that amount of time, a group of orphan genocide survivors from Rwanda reached out. They reached out to JT, and they wanted to share their experience with him. So this is a picture of that. This is actually the second Skype. So the first Skype, they had an interpreter in between them, and two beautiful orphan genocide survivors from Rwanda said to JT, we heard about what happened to your brother in Sandy Hook, and we're so sorry, and we just want you to know that we want to share our experience with you and let you know that you're going to be okay and you're going to feel joy again. And I remember standing behind him going, wow, because I hadn't spoken to anybody with any sort of legitimacy in telling me that I was going to be okay. It's easy to say, well, you're going to be fine, except that nobody had ever been through what I'd been through. And here were legitimate people that had probably been through worse than we'd been through, telling us that we were going to be okay. So they started sharing their story. And Chantel said, and of course the Rwandan genocide happened in 1993 when over 1 million Tutsis were murdered by their neighboring Hutus, and terrible genocide. Chantel was 8 when her neighbors broke into her home, and she's telling us this. They murdered her entire family in front of her by machete. They took her by the hair and they slit her throat, cut her all over her body, and buried her in a shallow grave alongside members of her dead family. And she had to wait for several days there because the Hutus had lists, and they would walk around making sure that everyone was dead. And so after a few days, she dug her way out, and she found her way into an orphanage. And she said it was when she got to the orphanage and after her physical wounds started to heal that she started to feel this profound sense of gratitude. She said it was for the walls that were providing safety. It was for the little amount of food she was getting. It was for human compassion that she was receiving. And she said once she was able to feel grateful for what she had, then she came upon this realization that she had to forgive those people that murdered her family, because if she didn't, she would be going down the same path of anger and destruction that they had gone down. So she made a conscious choice to forgive them. And she said once she did that, she was able to find meaning in her suffering and use it to help other people, like she was reaching out to JT and doing. And then Matthew had a slightly different story. He and his family escaped into the mountains, and for 3 months they ate grass while they watched the destruction of their village. His mother died of starvation. His father was so traumatized that he couldn't care for the family, so everything fell on Matthew. But Matthew loved school so much, even though he'd never be anything other than a subsistence farmer with no water, no electricity, that he walked down a mountain for 2 hours one way, no breakfast or lunch, he couldn't afford it, and back up in the afternoon just to finish his elementary school. So after this Skype, JT and I went back into the living room and we're sitting there and we started listing things that we had to be grateful for. And we realized that we had a lot to be grateful for. We had our family and friends. We had neighbors that were bringing a warm meal to our door every night. We had our aminals, we had each other, and then we both made a conscious decision to forgive the man that had murdered Jesse and his friends, knowing that if we didn't do that, we would stay in this kind of pit of anger and despair that we were in. And then I looked over and I saw JT writing in a journal, and we had boxes of stuff from all over. 3/4 of the stuff that we were sent were from children, and they were handmade gifts, handmade cards, sorry for your lost. It was just so precious. And a whole stack of journals that we hadn't opened. And he was actually writing one, and I said, "What are you writing?" And I will never forget this quote. He said, "Those children reached out to me in love, and I'm going to reach back out to them. And I'm going to start a fundraising campaign, and I'm going to send them to college." And so JT actually, on his own, went back to school the next day and started a fundraising campaign, selling bracelets. Newtown Helps Rwanda. He has a little website too. 2 months, he was able to Skype back to that same group and announce to a woman named Betty that he had raised enough money to send her to university for 1 year, plus an additional $400, because he found out that when you were 8 years old in Rwanda and you survived, you were given up to 6 younger children to take care of, to clothe, bathe, feed. And so they all still live in these huge family units. And Betty's family consisted of 9 people, and her part of the income for the year was $400. So going to college or going to university was one thing, but her family wouldn't be able to survive without that part of the money. So JT raised the money for her school and for her family. And he was able to announce this to her in person, and she just collapsed and started crying. And JT looked at me and said, "Is she okay?" And I said, "JT, with a little bit of effort on your part, you've fundamentally changed another person's life. And it's really not even fair to surprise her like this, because everything has changed." And JT got a beautiful thank you letter the next day. He did follow, raised the remaining 3 years of university for her, plus family expenses. Now, through our travels, we've met other kids that are traumatized throughout the world that need help. He's helped build self-sustaining fish ponds in Uganda for former children soldiers. He's helped an animal shelter in Goa that has orphans come to visit. He's helped kids in the United States. And actually, I forgot to mention, he was a Student Rotary Club Award recipient of the month when he was 13 for that. So I'm really proud of JT, and he is an example of the power of service, because I described his personality before, and he really had some tough things that happened in his life before that. His life wasn't easy, and I remember praying at the firehouse saying, "I don't think that he's going to be okay. If Jesse has died, I don't think he's going to be okay. I don't think that he'll be able to survive this, because I don't think I'm going to be able to help him." And he chose to do this on his own, and it's really the power of service. He's doing so well now. His latest project, he's a script writer. He's going to write a film, and I'll make sure that you guys are invited to the preview, but he's already gotten Tony Robbins and Hugh Bonneville to do small parts in it. So he's really excited. And that's all going to benefit his Newtown Helps Rwanda. So what was the healing equation that the Rwandans gave JT and I? It was gratitude plus forgiveness plus service to others. And amazingly, this is the same healing equation that Jesse left on our kitchen chalkboard. Gratitude plus forgiveness plus service to others, nurturing, healing, love. Here's a picture of his website. So I came upon my purpose through a tremendous amount of suffering. And I feel like we all have a purpose. And what I've learned, how I survive, is by being in service to others. I now cannot live my life any other way. And I talk about that. You don't have to go through a tragedy to come to that, but I'm realizing that that's really the only reason that we're here, is to help one another, to love one another, and to be in service to one another. And so my purpose is to spread this message of nurturing, healing, love, which is a healing equation. I've written a book. I'll do this any way I can. I've written a book about my journey of hope and forgiveness. And JT and I have actually even gone into prisons. These guys are convicted felons. So these guys have been raped. They were active gang members. And these are the guys that people say are unable to be rehabilitated. And we sent my book up to them 2 weeks before we visited. And this is actually in a documentary called Surviving Sandy Hook. A filmmaker from the BBC came in with us, and we spoke to them for 2 hours. I talked to them about Jesse's courage in the classroom and what courage really means. Courage not fighting and killing, but courage to be kind and gentle and in service to other people. And I gave them the healing equation and Jesse's message. Walk them through how to choose love. Let them know that they are not their angry thoughts and that they can lead them down a path, but they don't have to go. They are more than their thoughts, and they have control over them. And walk them through loving kindness and gratitude, forgiveness, what forgiveness means, which I'll talk about in a minute, what I've learned about it, and being in service to others. And within 2 hours, and I didn't ask them to do this, but they all dedicated their lives to choosing love. They asked me if I could leave behind a picture of Jesse so that when they had an angry thought, they could choose a loving thought. And so we had a decompression session in the warden's office, and the filmmaker was shaking his head going, I don't believe that just happened, because what you're saying is not rocket science. It's like really simple, and I don't believe that it's that powerful. I don't believe that nurturing, healing love could have that kind of effect. So he went back and he re-interviewed these guys. And he said, about a month later, and he said, okay, so that was, it was inspiring and it was emotional, but you guys went back to your cell. Nothing in your life changed. So are you still dedicated to choosing love? And they said they were. So that was really a beautiful time for JT and I. If I had to boil my entire experience down to one word, it would be choice. Because we all know Viktor Frankl's beautiful quote. It's really true. You can't always choose what happens to you, but you can always, always choose how you react. You can always choose to forgive. You can choose to forgive yourself and choose to forgive others. And in doing so, you're choosing love. I want to talk just a little bit about forgiveness, because I think about what I knew about forgiveness on December 13th. Even though, I don't know, I've been to church, not too regularly, but I had faith, and I knew that you forgive so that you're forgiven. I graduated from college. I'm just saying, like, that didn't mean anything, because I really didn't know anything about forgiveness. And what I learned myself. And I was giving a talk to a group of at-risk youth, and these guys were tough. And they had dropped out of high school, they had kids, they had drug addiction problems, and I'm talking about forgiving yourself and forgiving others. And one guy in the back of the room raised his hand and he said, "What is forgiveness?" And I froze. And I'm thinking to myself, really? You're going to stand in front of a group of kids, you're going to talk about forgiveness, and you can't even think of a Webster definition? What are you doing? You have no idea what you're talking about. So I said, I'm going to tell you what forgiveness means to me. And I said, I felt like I was attached to the shooter with an umbilical cord. And it was coming from my side into his. And all of my personal power was draining out of me through this umbilical cord into the shooter in the form of anger. And I was dragging him around with me everywhere I went, because I was constantly thinking about him in anger. And he was always with me. And forgiveness to me was a big set of scissors. It was a choice to forgive. And I took that set of scissors and I cut that umbilical cord, and instantly I felt my personal power rushing back into me, and I disassociated myself. I distanced myself. And he raised his hand again and he said, "How long did it take you to do that?" And I said, "That's a great question, because I did that very early on. I made that choice, but it doesn't mean that I don't have anger. It doesn't mean that I don't hear little details of what went on in the classroom, how Jesse and his friends were terrified. And I get mad. What does that mean? That I've failed? That I can't forgive? That I just shouldn't forgive? It doesn't. All it means is that you have to forgive again. And I think about a lesson that Jesus taught us, which I remember learning as a little girl. I think it was Matthew who said, "Lord, how many times should I forgive?" And Jesus said, 77 times 7. And I remember going, okay, 77 times 7, that's 490. If I forgive 490 times in my life, I'm good. And I think I can do that. And now I realize, after my personal tragedy, that meant per transgression, that you have to maybe forgive 490 times per something that happens that makes you angry. You just keep forgiving, and you haven't failed if you fall into anger. You forgive again. Another thing, we say, forgive and forget. Just forgive and forget. Is that possible for me? That completely sets me up for failure. I will never forget about what happened to Jesse, right? So it's not forgiving and forgetting. You don't have to forget to forgive. Another thing I think people think is that forgiveness means that you condone something that happens, that when you forgive, it's okay. It makes that act okay. And that is absolutely not correct. I will never condone what Adam Lanza did on that day. I don't have to, though. I forgive for myself without condoning what he did. And it also doesn't mean that you don't hold somebody responsible for their actions. Whoever hurt you is responsible for their actions, but you can still forgive for yourself, and they can still be held responsible. So this is a few different things to think about with forgiveness, and I'm still learning. Another thing that I realized is that every day when we wake up, we make choices, right? That word choice again. And those choices are based on whether we are in a fearful time or a faithful time. So every choice, I think, that we make on a daily basis is made out of faith or fear. And I look back over my life and I see a lot of the decisions that I made were fear-based. And I have to be gentle with myself because, I was a single mom supporting 2 boys. But after Jesse died, I lost a lot of that fear. Like, for instance, I no longer fear death, which was a huge burden off my shoulders. It's really amazing how much that might impact people without them even knowing it. And so every morning I get up and I remind myself to be faithful, even after faithful meaning you can believe in a God, or you can believe in yourself, or you can believe that the universe is conspiring for you. You can believe that everything is going to be okay. You can believe that there's a master plan and that you are part of it. And that is what I believe. And so every day I get up and I say, I'm going to make my decisions today based in faith. And they're so much different than decisions that are based in fear. So I would like for you guys to try that. So what we've done is we've started Choose Love movements all over the world. We're talking about Malawi before. These posters are hanging in schools there, in Argentina, in Germany, and Australia, really all over the world. How to start a Choose Love movement. It's really easy. There are only a few steps, and it starts with being aware of your thoughts and then choosing to change negative, angry thoughts into positive ones, and talking to yourself in a positive, kind, and loving way. Breathing helps too. So the healing equation which I have been talking about, which was given to us by Jesse, Nurturing Healing Love, and also by the orphan genocide survivors in Rwanda, saying the exact same thing and how they got over their tragedy, is the following: gratitude, feeling gratitude for things that you have in your life. When you feel like you're very low, when you feel like you're not choosing love, think about something to be grateful for. And you can always have something to be grateful for. Trust me. And then forgiving and thinking about forgiving. And forgiveness is not only just for other people, but it's for yourself as well. And compassion. And of course, compassion, I now know, has two components. It's not only feeling another person's pain, but it's actively doing something to help ease that person's pain. And that does equal healing and joy. I can tell you that has worked for JT and myself. And now I think, unless I forgot, I told you I was going to give you the meaning of life. So here is the meaning of life as JT and I know it. It is practicing nurturing, healing love, plus having the bravery to choose to have a lot of fun. Thank you.
So I just wanted to thank you on behalf of Rotary, Rotaract, Nova Scotia for coming and speaking with us today. I know I am touched beyond belief by your presentation, and I can't even attempt to put into words, but I know with the work we do here with Rotary and Rotaract, what you told us today is great encouragement to be brave, to be courageous, and to continue to inspire people. So from all of us, thank you so much.